Okay, I think we'll officially start. So hello and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Nina Gbor. I'm the director of the Circular Economy and Waste Program at the Australia Institute. So welcome to our webinar, Fashion, Circularity, and the North Star, with Dr. Lisa Lake, Professor Ken Pucker, and Adrian Jones. Thank you again for joining us. So before we officially begin, I need to acknowledge the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land in which I reside, and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. Sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So the days and times of our webinars at the Australia Institute vary, so please visit our website, australiainstitute.org.au, for details of upcoming webinars. So I'm just going to give you a few guidelines for our webinar, just to make sure that everything goes splendidly. If you hover over the bottom of your screen, you should see a little Q&A icon where you can ask questions of our panelists, and you can also upvote questions and also make comments. My colleague Vivian will be moderating the questions today, and we'll do our absolute best to ensure that we answer as many questions as possible, even though we won't be able to get to all of them. So bear with us. Now, please keep things civil, keep it short, keep it sweet. Otherwise, we will have to boot you out of this webinar, and please don't make us do that because we don't like doing it. Okay, so we'll finish around 11 a.m. and this discussion is being recorded and it'll be posted on our website and on our YouTube channel. So not everyone is familiar with fashion and textiles, but to give you just a little bit of a background, clothing and textile waste has reached unprecedented levels globally, with somewhere around 150 billion garments being manufactured each year on a planet of only 8 billion people. It's not surprising that more than 80% ends up in landfill each year. Now, our research here at the Institute earlier found that Australia is one of the biggest consumers of textile waste in the world per capita, with over 300,000 tons of textile waste being discarded each year. Now, ultra-fast fashion brands such as Temu and Shein are projected to make over $2 billion in sales in Australia this year alone. And this is not even counting other fast fashion brands like AliExpress and all the others. So many Australian clothing brands can compete with the artificially low prices of fast fashion, and therefore they're having to shut down. And sadly, at our current trajectory of overconsumption, we're likely to see even more brands, not just in Australia, but all across the world, having to go out of business. Now, fortunately, the Australian government is intervening with a product stewardship scheme based on circularity principles. However, much of the circularity discourse in general often fails to emphasize the need to drastically reduce the extraction of virgin resources to make products that often ends up becoming waste, and excessive waste in most cases. And addressing that through means such as tax or any other means. Now, on top of all of this, in the last few months, we're seeing another shocking trend where corporations are either canceling or scaling back on their ESG, net zero, and sustainability commitments. Brands like ASOS, Crocs, Coca-Cola, Shell, Unilever. So even tech companies like Microsoft and Google are having some of the same issues with growth and emissions, right? Contrary to their commitments. Now, the question is it greenwashing at play, or is there something else? Now, these are some of the conversations that we're going to have today with our expert panelists. And I'll start by telling you a little bit about Dr. Lisa Lake. She's the director of the Center of Excellence in Sustainable Fashion and Textiles, which is a partnership between UTS and TAFE New South Wales. The Center of Excellence is on a mission to aid the sustainable transition of Australian fashion industry through education, research, and advocacy. Next, we have Adrian Jones, who is a CEO and co-founder of BlockTex, Australia's first end-to-end ecosystem for unwanted textiles and clothing with chemical recycling technology to close the loop on end-of-life textiles. Adrian is a seasoned retail veteran with over 30 years experience in major retailers in Australia and the UK. He has held multiple CEO roles and senior roles in textile retail and wholesale businesses. And last but not least, we have Professor Kenneth Pucker, who is joining us from the United States, West Coast, although he's usually based on the East Coast in Massachusetts, where he is a professor of practice at the Tufts Fletcher School. Ken Pucker is an operator, advisor, investor, and educator with a focus on sustainability and ESG. In addition, Ken serves at Berkshire Partners as an advisory director, where he is a member of the firm's Responsible Investment Committee. Ken is a published author in periodicals such as the Stanford Social Innovation Review, Institutional Investor, and the Harvard Business Review. Ken spent most of his professional career working at Timberland, serving as Chief Operating Officer from 2000 to 2007. And during his tenure with the company, Timberland grew by tenfold to over $1.6 billion in sales. Thank you so much for joining us today, panelists and everyone who's joined this webinar. So let's begin with you, Lisa. Can you talk to us briefly about EPR schemes and circularity initiatives that were first implemented in France, but mainly the one that's being implemented here in Australia, how that works and why that's important?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me on the panel today. It's great to be here with my colleagues. And I would like to acknowledge I'm joining you from Camarago land today and honor, pay my respects to elders past and present. So EPR is basically, it's short for extended producer responsibility. You can think of it as taking the responsibility of dealing with a product that's been produced and sending it back up to the company that produced that thing. So in this case, clothing and textiles. There's a wide variety of ways that you can implement EPR. As you've mentioned, France has had a scheme since 2007. A lot of the EU nation states are going to have started implementing others, and there'll be even more coming in the pipeline in the next year as those regulations, the EU regulations become, more emphasized around textile waste. But the important thing to note also in the EU is that it applies to clothing, textiles, shoes, bedding, curtains, leather. So it's actually quite broad in its scope. In contrast, when we come to Australia, and as you mentioned, we now have the federally recognized National Clothing Product Stewardship Scheme, which is called Seamless. It's been in operation for a couple of months now, since July. And as the name suggests, we're starting first with clothing. So it doesn't include, I think it's just important to kind of recognize we're focusing on one section right now of clothing. So no bedding or textiles. There are other schemes actually for bedding. And the way that this scheme has been produced is that it's currently a voluntary scheme for fashion companies in Australia to opt in to join Seamless and pay, I believe it's still a 4-cent levy per item that you put on the market in Australia. And there is some reduction in that cost called eco-modulation. So if you're a company that's already engaged in a lot of ethical and environmental practices, you could qualify for a discount, which I believe is 3 cents per garment instead of 4 cents. So what the scheme will do is collect that money to then fund this scheme that will go into sorting and recycling programs, it will go into research, it will go into training, and it will go into consumer behavior campaigns. There's around 70 brands that have signed up so far. As I said, it's voluntary at this point, but Seamless is kind of making suggestions that they're taking the first steps toward some type of regulation. So they've said they've progressed the application to become an Australian government accredited scheme, which is the first step toward a regulated scheme.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction to Australia's product stewardship scheme. And Adrian, we'll go over to you. What are your thoughts on this, on seamless in general? Sorry, EPR schemes in general, and also seamless, but the really, give us your opinion on the governance and other critical factors involved.
Hi, thanks for having me. EPR schemes, I think, generally are a good idea. I mean, we never really price the externality of many things into an economic model, and therefore I think the idea of having an extended producer responsibility scheme in which the price of the recycling or the end of life of any commodity is recognized is a good thing. So EPR schemes, I generally think, I mean, despite me now being a textile recycler, I did train as an economist, so I actually understand that anything that can actually bring that external pricing into the model is a good thing. So I think EPR schemes are good. I think where EPR schemes can be even more effective is that they're not is in their governance, in the sense that if we have too many EPR schemes in Australia in which they're essentially run by the brands for the brands, and they're about making the brands look good, and they're actually about a little bit of greenwashing in terms of confusing the customer that, hey, I'm part of an EPR scheme, therefore nothing bad happens if I hand my products over to you, where we've seen in tires, in batteries, even consumer electronics, where those schemes actually suit the brands, but they actually don't in any way, shape, or form benefit the growth of onshore recycling. And so I think the governance for these schemes is really important. I think that it's very important that the full value chain that is required from collection, sortation, recycling, and procurement of the recyclate is represented in the governance structure of any EPR scheme. Because otherwise, if a seesaw is unbalanced, if everything's on one side of the seesaw, it kind of tips the wrong way. And I think it's really important that if we're going to go to customers or go to brands and say, we're charging you a fee, then the customer kind of expects there will be a service for that fee. And they kind of expect that that service will be onshore recycling and the production of materials that can then be used in a circular way to stop virgin materials being used. So I think that governance of the model of an EPR scheme is incredibly important, that it's not just the brands who are represented, it's the sorters, it's the collectors, it's the recyclers, because that will encourage the growth of onshore recycling. Because if I will say this time and time again this morning, if we enjoy the consumption in our country, we have to deal with the recycling in our country. We cannot keep exporting our way out of our own greed.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, we'll come back to that in a minute. I'd like to go over to Ken. And, because it's not based on a lot of the work that you've published, you talk a lot about obviously ESG schemes and their governance. And so it's not just, regulation with governments, it's also corporations and self-regulation and self-governance. And can you tell us about how these ESG schemes, policies, and circularity initiatives, why they're failing with corporations, as I mentioned earlier. You have companies like FedEx, Nike, Montclair, and even Air New Zealand are now hopping on this bandwagon of either scaling back or canceling their commitments and their pledges. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, thank you for having me. I'll answer the question first about why the broad group of companies are scaling back, I think. And then if you want to talk about circularity separately, I'm happy to do that as well. But across the broad group of companies you mentioned and others, I think there's at least 5 solid reasons why companies are now scaling back. The first is that the commitments that were originally made, I think, were made with haste without a great deal of science. And as 2030 comes closer, and that was the first kind of big interim target, they realized mathematically they're not going to be able to deliver on the commitments they made. One ex-head of sustainability from a multi-billion-dollar company just told me, he said, companies signed up for aggressive goals without doing their homework. And I think there is a good deal of that. The second reason is, in the US at least, there's a campaign that is, I think, venal and performative from Republican state treasurers to try to brand ESG or sustainability as woke and limiting choice. And I think it makes no sense, but it's had an impact. And both investment firms and companies as a result have become much more quiet about what they're willing to say in terms of their sustainability or ESG commitments. The third reason is ESG, which is an investment strategy. I think sustainability is more a corporate approach to thinking about responsibility. So I know they often get conflated, but ESG as an investment strategy had a real great run from really 2018 to 2021. The returns from ESG funds were higher than what I'd call traditional funds, equity funds over that period of time. And as a result, a lot of money flowed into the category and there was good real interest. And then investors were more interested in hearing from companies on what they were doing in terms of sustainability. That's all reversed since the Ukraine war and the price of oil has increased. Now, ESG funds have underperformed traditional funds. And so there are big outflows of money now and less focus on ESG as an investment activity. Not that it's gone away, it's just not nearly as hot as it was. The fourth reason is, I think after a lot of companies harvested what I would call straightforward win-win solutions around LED lighting and eco-efficiency and things like that, which represent, I think, about 10% of the sustainability opportunity, it gets hard. Most NPV investments are negative. And so when you hear people sell the notion of green to gold, it's not easy. It's really difficult for a whole host of reasons we can go into, not the least of which is most investments today remain NPV negative. So you can do them, but you will lose money doing them. And given what the state of the system is and the rewards and incentives, not many executives are willing to do that. And the last reason is really important, I think, which is the cost of revising targets is negligible. You know, all these companies that have revised their targets, there's no evidence that says target revision is correlated with any penalty in terms of stock price. And so if you were to revise your earnings estimates down by 20%, you can maybe do it once, maybe twice, but then you're going to lose your job. If you revise your sustainability estimates and say, hey, net zero in 2030, we were a bit aggressive, it's 2040, nothing happens. And there's bigger reasons for that, but that's probably enough for me.
Okay, wow, thank you so much for that perspective. That we rarely have this point of view when we have these conversations about why companies are failing at their environmental goals. Often we just put it to greenwashing, right? So I really appreciate that explanation. Now let's look at textiles and materials. So with nearly 65% of textiles being synthetic fibers, with polyester being the most common one, what are the concerns with things like overproduction and the need to switch to natural fibers? Lisa, let's go to you for this question.
Sure. Yeah, I think the latest report from Textile Exchange said that of all those synthetic fibers, 83% is virgin PET. So we're still not really even getting engagement in the recycled PET phase. I mean, I think there's two major problems when it comes to our reliance on synthetic fabrics. And in particular, as we're seeing this huge growth. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the growth in synthetic fibers over the past 10 to 15 years. It's exponentially growing. But the two major problems are, first, that they are part of fossil fuel extraction. There's no getting around this point. You can say that some of it's recycled, most of it's not, most of it's virgin materials. So it's connected to all the issues that are connected with fossil fuel extraction, be those environmental factors in terms of pollution, wastewater pollution, habitat devastation, loss of habitat, and also the kind of socioeconomic issues that come with fossil fuel extraction as well. I think it's such a complicated issue, and it's often overlooked when we're talking about fashion. You talk about it a lot when you're talking about fuel for your vehicle, but it's often kind of overlooked when you are thinking of this beautiful garment that looks and feels gorgeous. you're forgetting that part of it. There's some reports that also some of the big brands in the last year were unwittingly using Russian oil. So it's also, when I say the socioeconomic factors, it's these political factors as well of what you're actually supporting when you're investing in those fabrics. The other major problem, of course, is microfiber pollution. There's a lot of reports out there. They sound scary, and I think, you know, a lot of them sound scary because it's still early days. We know we're finding microfibers in every organ of the human body. We're finding it in every waterway. We're finding it in the air. We're finding it in placentas of children. We're finding it in stool samples of pretty much everybody. And we honestly just don't even know what those long-term effects will be. We know that there's endocrine disruptors in microplastics, but it really can't be overlooked that we don't really know what the end result of that will be. And we can talk about that, you know, there's some research happening here in Australia in Deakin where they're investigating how to prevent microfiber pollution in the washing of garments, which is going to be really exciting to see what they do in terms of extending the length of the fibers and things like that. So you can actually capture them in the laundry cycle. But we're shedding them just walking around. I mean, it's not just in the washing of the garments, it's in just the everyday use of our garments as well. So I think between, you know, just all the major concerns of fossil fuel extraction and then the trouble with microplastic shedding, we really need to shift away from synthetic fabrics as quickly as we can. Not saying it's easy. We would have done it by now, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Adrian, let's talk to you about fabrics and textiles and materials, because that's your everyday life, right? So speaking of synthetics and overproduction, you know, alluded to the problem of export waste, because, you know, we have an excessive amount of waste, particularly here in Australia, but also, you know, many other countries, particularly in the global north. What are your views on this? And does Australia have the capacity to repair, reuse, repurpose, and eventually recycle all of its textile wastes, you know, through companies like yours, Blocktext and other players? I just wanted to mention something you posted recently, or that was posted online. It's gone pretty viral, from Greenpeace and also Greenpeace in Ghana, where there's a video where 15 million garments are being shipped to Ghana each week. And this video is horrendous. It's showing pollution in the beaches and on the streets and just on land, and mountains and mountains of textile waste. It's absolutely horrendous. So I just wanted to get your point of view on Australia's role and what we could do differently.
That's a very wide-ranging subject, and a subject very close to my heart, as you well know, something I feel passionately about. So I shall try to keep this as unemotional as possible. I think that when I was a young bloke at university, I often wish I could have outsourced my hangovers. Sometimes you'd go out and have too much beer and you think, God, I wish somebody else could have this hangover for me, because it's really killing me right now. And I think we've sort of adopted the same thing when we're thinking about textiles. We want to enjoy all the consumption and all the goods and all the feel goods that come from having that consumption, and all those Instagram moments and all those selfie moments. But then we want somebody else to actually have the textile hangover, in the sense that we close our eyes, we donate it, or we put it into a recycling bin, and we hope that something good happens. And our sort of conscience stops there, because it's okay, I'm recycling. And recycling garments, really recycling garments, as we do chemically, back into their base forms, is hard, but it's doable. 5 years ago, none of this existed, and now it exists, and we do 10,000 tons of garments per year. You know, we do 8,000 shirts an hour. So scale can exist, and people who keep saying there's no scale in Australia are actually doing the whole industry a great disservice. But I do think that the world is not binary. You cannot say, today we do this, tomorrow we do this. There has to be a progression towards, as we'll discuss later, a North Star. There has to be an intent to get somewhere. But that intent gets somewhere by saying simple things, such as, If a garment can pass a simple common sense pub test of is this garment unwearable because it's torn, or it's stained, or it's ripped, that should not be exported. That should be recycled here because it has no economic use. Then people will say, but it's saleable somewhere. I think we're on a very, very slippy slope to moral ruination there. If we enjoy the consumption, we have to deal with the recycling initially of the unwearables here. With the second plant we intend to build with Blocktex, we would have the capacity to recycle all of the unwearables that are currently exported from Australia. So I don't buy into this narrative that there's no scale, we can't do it, we better stick with what we've always done. Because that's just the easy way out.
Yeah.
So I do think there is the opportunity, there is the capacity, there just needs to be the moral imperative and leadership to decide that's what we want to do. But I come back to my thing, if you have a hangover, you can't outsource it. You got to deal with it yourself.
That's a very good analogy. And I totally agree because we're just allowing somebody else to deal with our waste and, you know, the pollution and the emissions of it. We don't want it to pollute our shores, but we seem to be comfortable with allowing it to pollute the shores in other countries. And moreover, a lot of it is made of plastic. So this argument that, you know, it's helping, you know, it's a social you know, or it's aid or charity, or it's secondhand trade is helping countries in the global south, I think is a bit of a fallacy, especially considering how much we're manufacturing each year, and a lot of it is synthetic, right?
If I just may add to that, you think you raise a really important economic point there, is that if you think about the way most economies have evolved into a developed economy, textiles was often that point of early capitalization, that point of early sort of the conglomeration of capital around a fairly symbol. So by us flooding developing countries with our textile waste, it actually denies, not only is it a huge economic, is it a huge environmental pollution issue, you're also denying them those early stages of early capitalism where actually you start to form what will then go on to become the semiconductor society. So we're actually condemning these nations to economic sort of bewilderment for years because they're not starting their own textile nation, which is where the UK economy, the Australian economy started off the back of textiles.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And I think there lies the social responsibility, not by shipping our waste and our trash, but allowing countries in the global south to build their textiles economy. So let's move on because we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to go over to Ken. I think it's time we looked at solutions. I think we've kind of established these issues. So Ken, you talked about the reasons that companies are scaling back in sustainability. You gave us 5 really good perspectives on that. As you mentioned, not to conflate ESG and circularity, but let's talk about environmental initiatives, which I think is more of a broader term. What are some of the holistic solutions that can be done instead, and how legitimate will they be if, again, you know, they're allowed to be voluntary? Sorry, Ken, you need to take off your yeah, there we
It's
go.
probably better you didn't hear the beginning, so I'll try one. I just wanted to build on what Adrian was saying and say that he was mentioning that leaders and executives need to have the morality and courage to actually ensure that we deal with our own hangovers. And I don't think there is much of that now. And I think that the reason for it is money. It's not free to actually do the work that Blocktex and others are doing. And a reverse logistics supply chain isn't straightforward. And especially when you're talking about multiple brands sharing a reverse logistics supply chain. And so will voluntary work? No. I think we have now 25 years of evidence. I think the first CSR report was published by Shell Oil Company in 2001. So we've got enough evidence to say that corporate market-based voluntary sustainability, it not only doesn't work, I think it's quite damaging because I think it creates an impression for some people that more is happening than actually is happening. And so I don't believe that the current path we're on in terms of market-based voluntary sustainability works. That's not to say that there aren't illustrations of exemplar companies. There are. So if you want to be inspired by a company that I think's done a really wonderful job on the environmental front, it's Puma, who doesn't get nearly as much focus as, let's say, Nike or Adi do. But read through their sustainability report if you have the time. It's over 100 pages, and it's not pictures. It's legit, okay? And what you'll find there is that they've been able to reduce, just on one measure, their carbon emissions by a third while doubling the size of their business over the last 7 years. So on average, per unit, their carbon footprint's gone down by 66%. Not all the way there, but pretty impressive. And there's a lot that they're doing right. The leader who's in charge of this program is the head of sourcing, and she's brilliant and tough and courageous. They have a thoughtful governance structure that makes accountability and responsibility clear. They have an incentive plan that is shared at the highest levels of the company. They have deep relationships in country with local NGOs, not just suppliers. They do also have deep relationships with suppliers. More than 40% of their suppliers have been with Puma for over a decade, and they have responsible sourcing practices that commit to pay them on time and to not cancel orders. I mean, a whole series. So I'm giving you a very small piece of what I think is a really comprehensive and laudable roadmap, but they're the exception.
Right. Okay. Lisa, let's talk about the role that design has. The role that design and circularity have towards a more overall holistic system solutions. And one of the things I also want to know is, can you quickly take us through the possibilities around advanced manufacturing in textiles production? Because I know that that's something that the Center of Excellence is working on at the moment.
Yeah, great. I think design often kind of gets shrunk down to the concept of a designer sketching a garment, and then that's where design starts and finishes. But really, we reside in the School of Design at a university. We've got design thinkers all around us. And so design is so much more than that sketch. A design is this kind of iterative, usually a collaborative process where you're really thinking through what is the problem you're trying to solve with this thing that you're starting with. And that's what you need to think of as a sustainable or a circular designer, is what is the problem that I'm trying to solve with this thing I'm creating, whatever it happens to be. So, you can think of that as designing for longevity and designing for circularity in terms of choosing durable fabrics, choosing natural fibers, choosing garments that are easy to repair, choosing garments that are easy to disassemble. So when they have finally come to the end of their useful life there, it's easy to remove the zippers or the buttons or whatever, so they can be recycled at a place like Blocktex. And so you need to think of all those things right at the beginning. There's varying kind of statistics on what percentage a designer is responsible for. Sometimes people say 80% of the impact of a product is at the design phase. But really what that means is you're looking far into the systems that you're working with. We cannot change the fashion system only from the perspective of the fashion designer. You have to be working with the suppliers, you have to work with the retailers, you have to work with the recyclers, you have to work with the consumers. And so it's really, when we're talking about systems change, that's what you're talking about. And it's not easy. These conversations help. It helps that we all start to know each other. But when you really get into the details of creating a garment, which is so complex when you look at the materials and how it's used, the system spreads really wide. But I'll move to part B of your question around advanced manufacturing. It is something that we're really excited about at the Center of Excellence, because it offers one avenue towards circularity and also the potential of a sovereign capability here in Australia. So, for example, UTS has recently acquired this gorgeous seamless knit machine, which is basically like a 3D printer for garments. When used appropriately, responsibly, you might say, It enables on-demand production. It enables very low to zero waste production of knitwear. We're doing a number of experiments on, how can we design out synthetics and still get the stretch, just by using different knit structures and fibers. But advanced manufacturing, really, it just means using technologies to improve the way that we're producing things. It could be seamless knit. It's also laser cutters of fabric. It's also digital weaving looms. It's the use of 3D software to create virtual samples instead of physical samples. So we're really actively seeking funding. If anybody knows of some thoughts of, aren't we all? But we've got a workflow designed out where we want to test, the virtual sampling through to, using various modes of advanced manufacturing technology that exist in Australia to create, these kind of disaggregated factories where you can actually design somewhere in Australia and have it cut and sewn or knit, just made to order, so that we're really limiting the quantities being made. That's, of course, the complete opposite end of the scale of fast fashion. And these machines are used for fast fashion as well. So that's what I mean by using it responsibly. Fast fashion brands would absolutely be using seamless knit machines to kind of just churn out the thousands and thousands of garments, because once you do the programming, it is a very efficient way to produce garments. So it's about how can we introduce ways of using this equipment that, supports a sustainable future rather than enables this excessive overproduction.
Yeah, that's such a good conclusion to that question. Thank you for that. And Adrian, there's a lack of uniformity and harmonization when it comes to waste regulation at both state and federal levels here in Australia. We know that's a big problem, not just with textiles, but other industries as well. And I'm sure in other countries have similar issues. So take us through the dynamics of this issue, and most significantly, how you think that we can resolve it.
Blimey, I get the good questions, don't I? Look, federalism, from a waste management perspective, federalism in Australia has been it remains an unmitigated disaster. We can't even define waste across the same states. We can produce a product in Queensland that has to go through 6 different regulatory approaches in each state we wish to use that product. And therefore the costs of doing business are just enormous. But the chances of that changing would involve politicians voting for kind of their own destruction. So it's kind of like turkeys voting for Christmas. It's not going to happen. But the complexity of not having a national definition for waste, the complexity of saying, well, if something is used differently in this state to this state, I know that's the same in the US as well, it just becomes incredibly complex. The fact that we have, at a federal level, we have an environment minister, but waste is a state issue. These are just levels of complexity and bureaucracy that actually stop the process moving forward and mean the bad actors in the system can continue to prosecute what they do because they know that legislative change will just take a long time. I think Ken mentioned it earlier, and it's something I think that where so often these schemes, we still seem to have this view that the free market kind of works, which is just beyond me. Because in areas like the basic setting of prices for a commodity, which everybody has this idea of, complete knowledge and this, it's just horse. No, the model is over. The model is broken. We need to have mandatory schemes in which, as Ken said earlier, we need to have mandatory schemes that actually have real penalties for people. If you do not do this, this happens to you. If you say you are going, we found it fascinating in the one of our outtakes is PET, and it's a recycled PET, and that's exported from Australia because there's no spinning capacity for PET in Australia, and that goes into threads and yarns overseas. Interestingly, we had to apply for a license to initially prove that it wasn't a waste, even though it's been through a completely remanufacturing process. So that was a whole level of bureaucracy. But then by exporting this to other countries, you then kind of realize the costs involved in doing all of this. And so we know that our solution needs to go towards the problem. We need to site our technology closer and closer and closer to the sources of manufacture, so we can actually lower them. Otherwise, we're sort of decarbonizing a product here to add carbon to it by putting it onto a diesel-powered boat and sending it over to. So we've got to think about all those things through. But I think there just needs to be a lot more. We have to stop believing in voluntary schemes. We just do.
Absolutely.
We have, if we're serious about this, let's legislate it and make people pay. Because when people pay, they sit up and listen. And if they don't want to pay, they don't play. It's that simple.
Fantastic. Okay, we're out of we should be done with this segment, but this is the final question, Ken. I apologize if you're gonna have to summarize your answer even shorter than the 2.5 minutes I initially gave you. But I just feel like this conversation would be remiss without addressing the gargantuan issue of ultra fast fashion. You know, brands like Shein and Temu I believe are the founding fathers. I like to call them the founding fathers of ultra fast fashion. And you know, briefly describe what propels, you know, what ultra fast fashion is, you term instant fast fashion. You know, it's huge success and rapid success. And the question is, are proposed legislation such as, you know, taxing fast fashion, do you think that they are viable options for curbing the flow of fast fashion and also preventing fast fashion from dominating the global supply chain?
So that's a lot, but I'll try to be brief. In terms of how they get here, their business model is wonderfully powerful. It's as powerful as their environmental and social performance is negative.
Mhm.
The reason, well, it's hard to explain quickly how they've been able to do this, but their business model is really powerful. They just to give you orders of magnitude, Shein, for example, orders as many manufacturers from concept to on-site, as many new products in 10 days as Zara does in a year. Their average concept to site build time is less than 10 days. When I was at Timberland, you know, if we had to rush something, you know, if we got something done in 200 days, that was a small miracle. Now, footwear is harder than apparel, but still, 10 days is extraordinarily quick. 70% of their product comes from oil. Their average price points are 50% less than the average of H&M and Zara. If you want much more about this and the consequences for the planet, I wrote an article called The Lingering Costs of Instant Fashion that might be of interest to folks. That was in Harvard Business Review not long ago. But there's a massive intention versus action gap when it comes to consumers, Gen Z and others, for a whole host of reasons we don't have to get into. And I just think they will continue to be wildly successful unless there are different rules put in place. In the US, there's conversation about, for example, closing a de minimis loophole, which allows them to import these products as long as they're less than $800, duty-free. So in 2021, for example, H&M paid $205 million in import tax, Gap paid $700, and Shein paid nothing. Now, should that loophole be closed? Unequivocally, right? But that won't make a difference, meaning they will still be wonderfully powerful or destructively powerful with their business model.
Right. Thank you so much for summarizing. I know that wasn't easy for you. I appreciate it. And we'll just have 1 minute quick round final question for each panelist. If you can answer this in 1 short minute. And so in a statement, can you summarize in your view what the North Star is for a sufficient, ethical, and sustainable fashion future? So it can be something you've discussed in this webinar or anything else that you feel would kind of summarize what we need, what that North Star might look like. Anybody can go first. Lisa?
I can go first because I can give you a lot of time back.
Okay.
I'd just say
Go ahead.
What we need is new rules.
Sure. New rules. Okay.
I would say, yeah, I mean, I would second it. We need new rules. There's similar issues with the importation of ultra fast fashion into Australia. And, you know, can we aspire to a degrowth mindset or donut economics where we're actually you know, we are all getting used to buying less stuff and making less stuff.
Okay, fantastic.
I'm going to go with 4 points. Consume less. We don't need as many clothes as we do, so just consume less. As an ex-retail CEO, sounds kind of weird, but yes, consume less. Legislate more. We need more intervention, not less in this market. Yeah. Recycle onshore. Stop believing developing countries with lower GDP per capita can do a better job than we can with advanced manufacturing. So recycle onshore and just ban exports.
Absolutely. Okay, we are now going to go to, thank you so much, everyone. You guys have been a phenomenal panel. If you're able to see the comments, everyone's very excited about the discussions and insights you've brought to the table today, so thank you. So we'll start with a question from Esther, and she's asking, does Australia have a strong overall waste segregation scheme for plastic, glass, tin, food? And how mature is the garment textile collection scheme? So that's 2 questions there. I think maybe we'll favor the garment textile collection one, since we're not talking about glass and tin and food today.
I'll have a quick go at that.
Yeah, I think that's to you, Adrian. You're probably
we have very defined collection schemes for all of the waste streams, so cardboard, glass, bottles, plastics, all that. Yeah, but even though our T-shirt is made of the same material as our Coke bottle, we care far more about where we put our Coke bottle than where we put our T-shirt. And so our collection schemes for textiles in Australia are generally 2 routes: to the op shop or to the bin. And I think we need to get a lot more segregated about that and give consumers a lot more choices that are easy. So, for example, one thing we're looking at is how we actually investigate curbside collection and giving households the ability to collect textiles directly from their households, because that will increase the supply of products. So I think that textiles collection schemes in Australia are particularly immature.
okay, fantastic. Thank you. So this question is from Bernadette. So how much support is there to promote alternative textile products such as hemp? The cotton industry is said to be an environmental problem due to the amount of water and chemicals required. So Lisa, would you like to take this one, or Ken?
Sure. Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
So how much support is there to promote alternative textiles such as hemp?
Right.
And then the cotton industry is said to be an environmental problem due to the amount of water and chemicals required.
Yeah. Thank you, Colleen. I see your comment that hemp and cotton use similar amounts of water. And there are, of course, great benefits to hemp, that it naturally needs less pesticides and you can replant it and all that. I think cotton has continued to get a bad rap for a variety of reasons. It got a lot of attention, in some of the films that came out a few years ago. I do know that in Australia, there's been a very robust scheme through Cotton Australia to reduce water, to reduce fertilizers. So I think the comparisons are actually a little bit different now when you're comparing hemp to cotton. And we still have to come back to the kind of feel of the garment and how the fabric actually sits on your body. So I don't think that I'm not anti-hemp, don't get me wrong, I love it. It's just about making sure we are thinking about the end use of the product as well. Again, that kind of design mindset and what is the most appropriate fabric. Whether there's an actual scheme to help promote it, I don't think so. It's one of those products that, because of its affiliation with THC from however many years ago, hemp has that lingering stigma in government and doesn't get as much support as other crops do.
Sure. I'll just mention to the panelists, if you have any articles, links, resources, if you want to put them in the chat, because people are asking for them, that would be great. Now, this question is from Jill. Sorry. Basically, she was asking what environmental laws should be put into place? Ken, I'm going to put that to you first, because I think,
So when I was born, there was a cigarette tax in the US that was $25 a pack. It's now in New York City $20 to buy a pack of cigarettes, and it doesn't cost more to harvest tobacco. The difference is tax, okay? And consumption's down 75%. Now, it's more than just the tax. There's education, there's increased knowledge, there's health risks, there's a lot of things. But if you want, Adrian was an economist, if you want someone to use less of something, make them pay more for it. And so, you know, a tax on fossil fuel derived materials wouldn't be a bad idea. A carbon tax wouldn't be a bad idea. An EPR scheme with a real price, not 4 cents a garment, but a real price wouldn't be a bad idea. There's 3.
Fantastic. So the final question, how do we tackle the perception of textiles as low value, especially in a cost of living crisis? How can designers and brands with a focus on sustainability and product stewardship be viable and successful alongside a market flooded with cheap imports? And this question is from Lisa. Would anyone like to tackle this?
I'll jump in. I think there's absolutely a huge amount of work to kind of untrain the public on the quality of clothes, but there's some really great examples of garments that are quality made that are still the most desired garments in the world. The pieces that are being produced by Shein and Temu are knockoffs of the real thing, and people want that real thing for a reason. We're doing some research right now with the Volt, which is a rental company that rents out high-end designer gowns, and really interrogating what is it that's making the most desired gown, like which are the ones that are most rentable, how is the durability stand up in that, and also, you know, researching this kind of new business model around how we can wear and share clothes. When it comes to the cost of living, I think there's no doubt it's hit the retailers so hard this year. I can't think of one major fashion brand that, maybe there's 1 or 2 that are still doing okay, but most of them are really doing it tough. And so I think it's a combination of regulation that we've talked about. We need to regulate especially those ultra fast fashion brands that are really killing our local industry. And then celebrating what we know great Australian brands do very well. They're great designers here, and there's great producers and manufacturing here as well. So I guess that was a bit of a ramble, but I think it's kind of 2 parts there.
Yeah. So Adrian, I'll just put in one final question. And this is a good one because I remember back in, I think it was 2015, 2016, recycled PET bottles was a trend. I remember they had celebrities on the red carpet saying they're sustainable because they were wearing dresses that were made from plastic bottles, and that was such a big thing back then. So is it responsible to recycle PET bottles into textiles for clothing, given that microfibers will continue to be released into the environment during its life cycle?
I think recycling a PET bottle into textiles is about as smart as putting your head into a lion's mouth. It's a wonderfully valuable material that's gone through a lot of cost and effort to make a PET bottle or food tray. And then we convert it and trap it in a textile that, unless it's lucky enough globally to come via Blocktex, is then destined for landfill. The idea of bottle to textile recycling needs to be legislated out of existence. Bottles must stay as bottles, meat trays must stay as meat trays, textiles must be reconverted back into textiles. Chemically, they are the same PET, but the costs involved in making a bottle into textiles is just dumb. It's just not worth doing. So when you see t-shirts that say, I was made from 15 bottles, it's really poor use of materials. Incredibly dumb.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, I think that concludes this segment of the webinar. I want to thank our wonderful, phenomenal expert panelists. You've each done a phenomenal job. I'm so excited. And you can see from the comments, people are really happy to learn some of the insights that you provided today. I know it hasn't been easy. These are big conversations, big topics, and it's been really hard to, narrow it into such a small conversation. I thank you for your efforts. Thank you so much for being here today. So we'll wrap it up here. And what I wanted to say is that, in addition to saying thank you, and, we appreciate your support for those of you who are subscribed to and follow the Australia Institute. It's been such a wonderful way to spend a Friday morning, Thursday for you, Ken, since you've joined us from the US. So make sure you subscribe to our podcast at the Australia Institute called Follow the Money. Subscribe on iTunes, wherever you normally listen to podcasts. Our next webinar is Unparliamentary on Tuesday morning, September 17th. It'll be about unpacking the big political and policy issues with Paul Karp, who's the chief political correspondent for Guardian Australia. So visit australiainstitute.org.au for more information. Thank you again for joining our webinar. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, and goodbye.
I make a quick plug for anybody who wants more information. Our next course starts on the 15th of October. Come hear more from Adrian. Interested in fashion sustainability, look us up. See you there.
Since you've had the opportunity, I should pass that to Ken and Adrian as well. If there are any new bodies of work that you want people to have a look at or follow, or projects, please. Now's the time.
Just have a look at our website and you'll see the fantastic stuff that we do. And as we say to everybody, if you deny or pretend that onshore recycling doesn't exist, you say to your children, you can only be what you can see. So look at our website and you can see what the future of textile recycling really is.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely rest of the day and night. Bye.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.